The first shot split the night like lightning striking stone. 1 second we were moving through the ridge, engines low, eyes sharp. The next we were trapped inside a perfectly laid kill zone. The radio shrieked in my ear, then died into cold, empty silence. No command, no extraction, no backup, only darkness, burning metal, and the violent rhythm of gunfire closing in from every side. Muzzle flashes tore through the black horizon. Sparks rained across the armored door behind me as rounds slammed into steel. Someone shouted that the rear vehicle was on fire. Another voice yelled, "We were surrounded." Panic tried to rise in my chest, sharp and suffocating, but I crushed it. Training took over. Slow breath, clear eyes, make a decision. Lives depended on it. I pressed the headset tighter, waiting for command to break the silence. Nothing came. No voice, no signal, just the hollow sound of isolation. That was when the truth hit me. We were completely alone, and if someone did not take control within the next 60 seconds, this ridge would become our grave. Then, beyond the smoke and shadows, something moved closer. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? 9 weeks into deployment, the desert had already carved its mark into us. Sand found its way into everything. Boots, rifles, lungs, thoughts. Car and ridge looked quiet from a distance. Just long waves of stone and dust under a pale sky. But anyone who had spent time there knew better. The land did not warn you when danger was coming. It watched, it waited, and when it struck, it did so without mercy. The operation order came just after dusk briefing. Routine escort, recon sweep, signal relay for a forward patrol pushing beyond the ridge. On paper, it looked simple, the kind of mission command barely worried about. But terrain like that never allowed routine. Winds shifted without pattern, visibility bent with heat and dust, and hostile scouts were known to move like ghosts along the outer ridgelines. You never saw them until they chose to be seen. My unit, Bravo Recon, had been together long enough to move without words. Sergeant Daniel Cole, steady and sharp, handled overwatch like second nature. Corporal Luis Morales managed the drone feed, eyes always scanning beyond what human sight could reach. Specialist Aaron Turner drove lead vehicle, calm under pressure, hands steady even when everything else shook. They joked while loading gear, the kind of humor soldiers use to keep fear from settling in. But beneath their voices, I felt something heavier, a tension no one named. Morales was the first to notice it. While reviewing thermal imagery from the drone sweep, he pointed out irregular heat marks scattered across the far ridge, not moving, not random, positioned, waiting. That detail mattered. Heat that stays still in a combat zone is rarely harmless. It usually means preparation. We reported it up the chain. Command reviewed the feed, ran their assessment, and came back with the same answer: low threat, continue mission. No deviation authorized. Their voice carried confidence, but something in the dismissal felt too quick, too certain. Experience teaches you when information does not align with instinct, and my instinct was rarely wrong. I did not challenge the order. Discipline means executing even when doubt whispers, but preparation is survival. Quietly, I made adjustments. Extra magazines distributed across the vehicles. Secondary route mapped in case the main pass became compromised. Emergency signal sequence pre-coded into the comm system, a measure rarely needed but never regretted. The team followed without question. Trust inside Bravo Recon was not spoken. It was built through shared nights, shared risks, shared survival. As we rolled toward the ridge, the desert darkened faster than expected. The horizon swallowed the last trace of daylight, leaving only shadow and faint moonlight stretching across the terrain. Engines hummed low. Tires crunched over gravel and dust. Every sense sharpened. Night operations have a different weight. Sound travels farther. Movement feels louder. And uncertainty grows heavier with every passing mile. Then, just before we approached the narrow choke point between two stone rises, the radio flickered. A brief pulse of static, sharp and sudden. Everyone heard it. Turner glanced back. Cole adjusted his headset. Morales checked signal strength on his console, The calm stabilized within seconds, returning to normal clarity, but that moment lingered longer than it should have. Equipment fails sometimes, but rarely without reason. No one spoke about it. Soldiers learn when silence is better than questions. Yet inside, something shifted. A quiet warning, deep and persistent. The terrain felt tighter, the darkness heavier. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the ridge itself was holding its breath. I watched the shadows along the high ground, searching for movement, for reflection, for anything that did not belong. Nothing revealed itself. And yet the unease did not fade. Missions rarely announce their true nature at the beginning. Sometimes the truth waits until you are too deep to turn back. As our convoy moved closer to the choke point, one thought settled firmly in my mind. The mission we were walking into was not the mission we had been given. And whatever waited beyond that ridge had been waiting for us long before we arrived. The explosion did not sound like chaos. It sounded deliberate. 1 second our convoy was clearing the choke point, engine steady, optics scanning the ridgeline. The next, the rear vehicle lifted off the ground as if the earth itself had rejected it. The blast flipped it sideways, metal twisting midair before crashing back down in a storm of sparks and dust. That was no random device buried and forgotten. It was triggered, timed, watched. We were inside a layered ambush. Gunfire erupted from both elevations at once, precise arcs of muzzle flash cutting across the darkness from the high ridgelines. Not scattered shots, controlled bursts. They had angles, they had range, they had rehearsed this. Contact left and right. Cole's voice came sharp over internal comms as he returned fire from overwatch position. His weapon thundered against the night, suppressing movement on the east ridge. Morales cursed under his breath. Drone feed just dropped. I lost visual. That was impossible. The drone had full battery and clean signal less than a minute earlier. I glanced at the tactical screen in my vehicle. Black. Static flickered once, then nothing. Rounds hammered against the armored plating. Sparks sprayed across the windshield like metallic rain. Turner fought the wheel, trying to reposition lead vehicle behind partial rock cover while tracer rounds carved lines through the dust. Multiple hostiles, Cole called out. More than intel showed. I count at least 2 full squads. Intel had briefed us on scattered insurgent movement in the sector, not reinforced positions, not crossfire geometry. This was structured, disciplined engagement. Then the radio died. Not static, not distortion, just silence. Total and absolute. I switched frequencies. Nothing. Attempted satellite uplink. Dead. Backup channel. Dead. Backup channel. Dead. Emergency ping. No confirmation. No command. No air support request. No extraction call. We were cut off. Enemy fire tightened its rhythm. They were adjusting to our defensive movement, closing angles slowly, patiently. Whoever led them knew exactly what they were doing. They were not rushing, they were squeezing. Mom, they're advancing downhill, Turner said, breath controlled but strained. They know we can't call this in. He was right. The confidence in their movement told me everything. They were not afraid of escalation. They were not worried about air response. They knew we were blind and alone. Morales slammed a fist against the console. Signal interference detected. It's not equipment failure. It's jamming. My pulse slowed instead of rising. Jamming meant preparation. Jamming meant infrastructure. This was not insurgent improvisation with scavenged explosives and stolen rifles. This was organized, strategic. Someone had invested resources to cut our voice from the sky. Can you triangulate it? I asked. Trying, he answered, fingers moving fast over manual override keys. Signal spike pattern, northeast ridge. It's controlled, rotational frequency, which meant it was deliberate and monitored. Another burst of gunfire slammed into the disabled rear vehicle. I could see flames licking from its undercarriage. Inside were 2 soldiers scrambling to reposition under suppressive fire. Cole shifted Overwatch to cover them, but even he was being pinned harder now. Enemy shooters were adapting. This was not a hit-and-run ambush. This was containment. They had chosen the choke point because escape routes were limited. They detonated the rear vehicle to seal withdrawal. They elevated positions to dominate lines of fire, and they jammed communication to prevent reinforcements. We were not just attacked. We were isolated by design. The weight of that realization settled deeper than the gunfire. Someone had studied our patrol routes. Someone knew our schedule. Someone anticipated our communication frequency. "Ma'am," Morales said quietly, voice lower now, "this isn't random insurgents. Whoever's running that jammer has technical support," which meant funding, which meant planning, which meant this was bigger than our convoy. Enemy forces edged closer using rock formations as stepping points, disciplined and synchronized. No reckless charges, no wild yelling, just methodical pressure. They were closing the circle inch by inch. I scanned the ridgeline again and caught a faint silhouette near the northeast crest. Taller equipment structure, unnatural against the stone. Not a natural formation. The jammer. They had built it where we could not easily see it until we were inside the trap. Another round struck near the engine block, sending smoke rising into the night air. Morales ducked lower. Turner reloaded without breaking rhythm. Cole's fire rate slowed slightly, conserving ammunition. This was not going to last long if we stayed reactive, and the worst part was not the gunfire. It was knowing that headquarters was hearing nothing. No distress, no request, no final transmission. Somewhere miles away, command likely believed Bravo Recon was simply moving along its route, quiet and routine. They had no idea we were seconds from being erased. Someone had ensured that when we fell, we would fall unheard. Time stretches differently in a firefight. Minutes do not pass, they grind. Each second drags across your nerves like metal against bone. The ambush did not fade, it tightened. Gunfire rolled across the ridge in disciplined waves, forcing us lower behind fractured rock and burning steel. The rear vehicle was fully engulfed now, thick smoke pouring into the narrow pass and swallowing visibility. The air tasted like fuel and dust. Every breath scraped my throat raw. "Ammunition check," I called out, keeping my voice steady even as rounds snapped inches overhead. "Half down," Cole answered from his compromised overwatch position. His elevation advantage was fading. Enemy shooters had repositioned to counter him. They were smart. They were adapting. Morales grunted sharply beside me. A burst of incoming rounds struck the rock face near his cover, sending fragments flying. One piece tore into his shoulder. He sucked in air through clenched teeth, blood already darkening his sleeve. "I'm good," he forced out before I could ask. Still operational. But I could see the strain in his jaw. He shifted awkwardly, trying to keep pressure on the wound while maintaining partial control of the damaged drone interface. Turner leaned into suppressive fire, buying seconds where seconds barely existed. The metal around us rang with impact after impact. Sparks flashed in the dark like angry stars. Every decision now carried weight measured in lives. Do we push? Do we hold? Do we conserve rounds or dominate angles? Every option risked someone bleeding out in the dirt. Retreat was impossible. The destroyed rear vehicle sealed a narrow exit. Forward meant climbing into elevated crossfire. Staying meant being ground down piece by piece. Fear did not shout, it whispered. It tried to convince me that the situation was bigger than control, that survival was no longer ours to command. I refused it. I looked at my team instead. Cole breathing controlled despite mounting pressure. Morales wounded but refusing to fall back. Turner hand steady even as tracer rounds cut lines inches above his head. They were holding because they believed I would hold. That trust weighed more than fear ever could. The enemy shifted formation again. I saw movement along the northeast ridge. Coordinated descent. They were closing distance now, confident that isolation would finish what the explosion began. Their patience told me they knew time favored them. No air response, no artillery, no countercall. A round struck near Cole's perch, forcing him to drop lower. "Overwatch compromised," he reported. His angle was collapsing. If they neutralized his elevation fully, we would lose our only ranged suppression advantage. Smoke thickened between the vehicles, reducing sight lines to silhouettes. Heat radiated from burning metal, distorting shapes in the air. It became harder to separate shadow from threat, harder to calculate distance. Morales tried to re-establish partial drone feed using manual override. Static flickered once, then vanished again. "Jamming strength increasing," he muttered. "They're tightening control," which meant they knew exactly how much pressure to apply Another enemy element advanced across the lower rocks, using our smoke as concealment. I adjusted fire direction, pushing Turner to shift right flank coverage. Ammunition count continued dropping. Every magazine ejected felt heavier than the last. This was the point where units began to fracture. Not because of weakness, but because sustained pressure erodes even the strongest defense. I could feel it building. The breaking point. Morales's breathing grew sharper. Cole's suppressive fire intervals shortened. Turner's reload speed increased slightly, subtle signs that fatigue was creeping in, and fatigue kills clarity. Without command, there would be no rescue call to interrupt the siege, no inbound aircraft to scatter them, no reinforcement convoy racing toward our coordinates. We were contained. A fresh wave of fire erupted from the northeast ridge, forcing us lower again. Chips of stone struck my face as I leaned to return fire. The enemy was closer now. I could hear individual shouts in a language carried sharply by the wind. They believed the circle was nearly closed, and if we allowed that belief to solidify, it would become reality. I tightened my grip on the rifle and forced my thoughts back into order. Chaos thrives on hesitation. Leadership demands movement, even when the path is unclear. We were reaching the edge. Ammunition thin, one soldier wounded. Overwatch weakened. Visibility fading, but braking was not an option. Not while they were still breathing. Not while I was still thinking. Another coordinated advance rippled down the ridge closer than before. Their silhouettes emerged through smoke like patient hunters, stepping into final range. This was the moment where many units crumble. I refused to let Bravo Recon become one of them. The firefight had settled into a brutal rhythm when Turner's voice cut through the chaos, low but sharp. "Ma'am, I'm picking up something." He wasn't looking at the battlefield. He was staring at the damaged comm panel, fingers moving fast, tracing faint signal spikes that flickered across the screen like distant lightning. "At first I thought it was interference," he continued, "but it's repeating. There's a pulse in the noise, a relay frequency." I shifted closer, ignoring the rounds striking the metal around us. Morales leaned in despite the pain in his shoulder, eyes narrowing at the pattern Turner had isolated. The signal wasn't random distortion. It rose, dipped, then rose again in controlled intervals, mechanical, deliberate, a pattern. And patterns can be broken. My mind began to reassemble the battlefield from a different angle. The jamming signal wasn't constant. It rotated strength in time cycles, likely to conserve power and avoid overheating, which meant there were micro gaps, fractions of seconds where the block weakened. Too small for standard communication, but not impossible. Command had not disappeared. We had been cut off. And anything that can be blocked can be interrupted. Another burst of gunfire struck nearby, snapping me back to the moment. The enemy was still advancing, still confident in our isolation. They believed silence meant defeat. "Morales, can you sync to that pulse?" I asked. He swallowed, steadying his breath despite the blood soaking through his sleeve. "Maybe. If I time the transmitter with the weak cycle, we might punch through, but it won't hold long." "I don't need long," I answered. "I need seconds." Seconds were enough to send coordinates, enough to confirm engagement, enough to wake command from the false quiet they believed we were in. For the first time since the ambush began, the weight pressing against my chest shifted. The situation had not changed. Ammunition was still low, smoke still choking the air, enemies still closing. But possibility had returned. And possibility is the difference between waiting to fall and choosing to fight. Turner adjusted the panel, manually overriding automated signal control. Sparks jumped from exposed wiring as he forced power through damaged circuits. The screen flickered, signal lines rising and collapsing like unstable waves. "Pulse window every 11 seconds, he said. "Weak point lasts less than 1 second. 1 second. That was all we would get. I calculated quickly. To reach the jammer tower directly would mean crossing exposed ground under concentrated fire. But if we could disrupt the signal locally, even momentarily, the transmission might reach satellite relay before the jammer reasserted full strength. Risk was unavoidable, but standing still guaranteed failure. "Cole," I called. "Shift fire to northeast ridge. Full suppression pattern. I need pressure off that sector for 30 seconds. "Copy," he replied without hesitation. His weapon roared to life again, controlled bursts hammering the ridge line, forcing enemy shooters to duck lower behind cover. Turner, prep transmission burst. Morales, sync timing with pulse. On my mark. Morales nodded, jaw tight, hands steady despite the tremor of pain. His eyes never left the signal rhythm. He wasn't just fighting injury now. He was fighting time. The enemy advanced again, sensing movement. Tracers streaked through the smoke, striking close enough to feel heat against my face. I ignored them. Every decision now balanced on precision. Too early, the signal would die. Too late, the chance would vanish. Pulse building, Morales said. Stand by, 3, 2, 1, transmit. Turner slammed the override. The transmitter surged, pushing a compressed distress signal into the sky. Coordinates, engagement code, unit identifier. The screen flared bright, then dropped to black as the jammer reasserted full strength. Silence returned, but something had changed. We had spoken. Now the question was whether command had heard us, or whether we would need to try again under even heavier fire. The enemy, unaware of what had just happened, continued tightening their circle. But inside me, the battlefield felt different now. Not safer, not easier, but no longer hopeless. Because control was no longer theirs alone. And if even one signal had slipped through that wall of silence, the balance of this fight was about to change. The first transmission burst had bought us something. Maybe seconds, maybe nothing, but I could not rely on hope alone. Even if command had heard the distress call, response time would not be immediate. And as long as the jammer remained active, sustained communication was impossible. If we wanted control back, we had to take it. The source is Northeast Ridge, 150 meters up, Morales said, forcing clarity into his voice despite the blood loss. Signal strength peaks from that position. That's the primary tower. I studied the terrain through drifting smoke. The ridge rose steep and uneven, fractured stone creating narrow paths and shallow cover pockets. Hard to climb, harder under fire, but not impossible. Cole, I said, you're shifting to mobile overwatch. Cover our advance. Copy, he answered immediately. No hesitation. That is what discipline sounds like. Turner, you're with me. Morales, redirect drone battery to short-range visual if you can't maintain feed. I want eyes, even partial. Morales gave a sharp nod and began manually rerouting power from the damaged drone system. The display flickered weakly, then stabilized into a narrow, grainy feed, enough to identify silhouettes and structure outlines. We moved, not running, not rushing, every step measured between bursts of incoming fire. Cole laid down suppressive shots that forced enemy heads lower along the ridge, giving us fragments of breathing room. Dust kicked up around our boots as rounds snapped past, some close enough to feel the wind of their passing. The enemy recognized our shift almost instantly, their fire redirected toward our new path. They understood what we were aiming for. Pressure increased. A round struck the rock inches from Turner's shoulder, spraying fragments across his vest. He didn't flinch, just adjusted angle and continued advancing. Smoke thickened behind us as the burning vehicle collapsed further, sending sparks into the night air. Every second we remained exposed risked someone falling. We used rock shells as stepping points, climbing higher along the fractured ridge. The incline burned in my legs, but I forced pace control. Too fast meant noise. Too slow meant being bracketed by coordinated fire. "Movement left flank!" Cole called from behind, firing controlled bursts to deter an advancing enemy unit attempting to intercept our climb. His position was less secure now, but he held it without complaint. Morales' drone feed crackled in my earpiece. Visual on structure, metallic framework, about 30 meters ahead of your position. 2 hostiles guarding base. Through the drifting smoke and moonlight distortion, I saw it, an unnatural silhouette against the ridge. Thin tower frame, antenna arms angled toward the sky. Portable but powerful. Exactly the kind of signal jammer designed to isolate without drawing wide detection. They had built it deliberately to sit just beyond immediate visual range from the choke point, close enough to block communications, far enough to avoid easy counterattack. We were almost within reach. But the last stretch offered minimal cover. 20 meters of broken stone, uneven and exposed. And the 2 guards at its base were not idle. They were scanning carefully, aware something had shifted. "Cole, I need distraction on northeast upper line. 10 seconds sustained." "On your go," he replied. I timed my breath, counted the rhythm of incoming fire, waited for Morales' update. "Pulse window in 6 seconds," Morales said quietly. Even now, the jammer rotated in predictable cycles. If we disabled it during a low phase, the signal collapse might cause internal overload. 3, 2, 1. Cole's rifle thundered louder, heavier. He pushed fire higher along the ridge, drawing attention upward. Enemy shooters responded instinctively, focusing on suppressing his elevated threat. "Move," I ordered. Turner and I surged forward in controlled bursts, boots striking stone, bodies low. Rounds cracked past, but their aim had shifted. We closed the distance fast, sliding into shallow cover behind fractured rock just meters from the tower. The two guards reacted late. One raised his rifle. Turner fired first, precise and decisive. The second attempted to reposition. I dropped him before he cleared cover. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Now the tower stood directly in front of us, close enough to see the power unit humming at its base, close enough to hear the faint oscillation of signal rotation. The enemy behind us began to realize what was happening. Shouts echoed along the ridge. Movement accelerated. We had seconds before they converged. "Morales, confirm pulse cycle," I called. "Next low phase in 5 seconds." I studied the control panel quickly. Portable power core, external frequency modulator, manual override ports. Destroying it outright would eliminate the jamming, but risk explosive feedback. Disabling it surgically would restore communication faster. Enemy fire intensified again, striking rock around our position. Cole was still holding them back, but pressure was building. We were within reach. Now came the part that would decide everything. Shouts echoed across the ridge as the enemy realized what we had reached. The pressure changed instantly. No longer distant fire, no longer probing shots. Now it was urgent, aggressive, converging. They understood the tower was their advantage, and if it fell, so would their control. "Ammunition check," I called, forcing calm into my voice. "Running low," Cole answered, breath tight but steady as he fought to hold the upper ridge alone. His rifle fired in shorter bursts now, careful, conserving, desperate to keep them pinned just a little longer. Morales' voice came weaker through the headset, strained under pain and blood loss. "Signal cycle, still rotating. You have a window, but not for long." The distance between us and the advancing enemy was closing fast. Their silhouettes flickered through smoke and broken stone, moving with renewed urgency. They were no longer patient hunters. They were rushing to stop us before the silence shattered. Turner shifted beside me, firing controlled shots toward an approaching flank. The click of his magazine dropping empty sounded louder than the gunfire. He slammed another in without hesitation, but the supply was thinning for all of us. I turned back to the tower. The control panel flickered under rotating signal output, metal vibrating faintly from the constant power surge. This was the heart of their trap, the machine that had cut our voice from the world, the machine that had allowed them to hunt us unheard. One wrong move here would not just fail, it would end everything. I wiped dust and sweat from my eyes, forcing my focus onto the panel. Frequency modulation dials. Power relay switch. Manual override port. It was built for remote operation, not field tampering. No clear instructions. No margin for error. Enemy closing 10 meters. Turner warned, firing again, forcing a hostile to drop behind cover. Sparks jumped from stone as rounds struck closer, hotter, louder. Morales' breathing crackled in my ear. "Next low phase, in 3 seconds. You must time it exactly." Time slowed. Not in reality, in perception. Every sound sharpened, every movement became deliberate. The weight of command, the trust of my team, the lives balanced on this decision, all of it narrowed into a single point of action. I steadied my hands against the vibrating metal and listened. Not to the gunfire, not to the shouting, to the rhythm of the jammer itself. The rise and fall of its signal pulse. Mechanical. Predictable. 2 seconds. A round struck the tower frame, sending a sharp metallic echo through the air. Turner shifted to shield my position, firing again despite dwindling ammunition. 1 second, Morales whispered. Now. I moved. The override tool slid into the manual port, connecting into the system's control circuit. My fingers adjusted the modulation dial sharply, forcing the signal into an unstable phase. The tower hummed louder, resistance building as it tried to maintain frequency lock. Enemy footsteps were closer now, too close. I could hear boots striking stone behind us, hear voices shouting in urgency. The power relay switch resisted under my grip, locked by internal feedback. If it jammed fully, the signal would spike, and the tower could overload violently. I forced steady breath into my lungs. Fear tried to rise again. Not fear of death, but fear of failing them. Failing the team that had trusted me. Failing the team that had trusted me. Failing the chance we had fought for. No hesitation. I pulled the relay. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The tower vibrated violently, signal oscillation rising into unstable distortion. Lights flickered across the panel, struggling between collapse and recovery. Gunfire roared behind us. Turner shouted something. I did not hear the words. Then the system began to falter. Signal strength dipped sharply, the hum breaking into uneven pulses. The jammer fought to regain lock, but the forced override had disrupted its cycle. The silence that had trapped us began to crack, but it was not fully down yet. The enemy was almost upon us, and the final collapse, or recovery, would be decided in the next few seconds. The tower screamed as the forced override tore through its cycle. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the silence broke. A sharp burst of static exploded in my headset. Broken, unstable, but alive. Bravo Recon, respond. Signal intermittent, identify, command. The voice was fractured by distortion, but unmistakable. Headquarters had heard us. Bravo Recon, engaged, grid 7-3 by Northeast Ridge. I transmitted fast, forcing clarity into every word. Enemy coordinated ambush, signal jamming, active, requesting immediate air and extraction support. The signal flickered, nearly dying again, then surged stronger as the jammer stuttered under failing control. Bravo Recon, copy. Hold position. Air support inbound. Extraction redirecting now. Stay active, stay alive. The words carried urgency, but also shock. They had believed we were operating normally. Now they understood how close we had come to disappearing. Behind us, the enemy sensed the shift instantly. Their fire grew erratic, no longer calm or patient. They knew what the restored signal meant. They knew the sky was no longer silent. Cole, fall back to defensive arc, I ordered. Moving, he responded, firing as he repositioned down the ridge toward our position. Ammunition was nearly gone, but his timing remained precise. The first distant roar rolled across the desert moments later. Low, thunderous, unmistakable. Aircraft. The sound alone shattered the enemy's momentum. Their coordinated advance broke into scattered movement as they scrambled for cover. Some fired wildly toward the sky. Others attempted retreat along the ridge. Then the night exploded. Precision airstrikes tore across the elevated positions, controlled bursts of fire striking the very points where the ambush had begun. The ridge that had trapped us moments ago now burned under descending force. Shockwaves rolled through stone and dust, scattering enemy formations and collapsing their control. Targets neutralizing. Command reported through strengthening signal. Extraction 2 minutes out. Mark position. Turner fired a flare into the night sky, a streak of burning light cutting through smoke and darkness, announcing the Bravo Recon was still alive. The ambush was collapsing. Enemy fire weakened rapidly, their structure broken under coordinated response. Those who had advanced closest abandoned their push, retreating into shattered terrain under overwhelming pressure. Cole reached us, breathing hard but standing. Morales leaned against the rock, barely conscious but still listening. The tower behind me sputtered once more, then died completely, its hum fading into silence. This time, the silence felt different. Not isolation, not defeat. Relief. Extraction lights appeared over the ridge, descending fast, rotors slicing the air. The aircraft hovered low as we moved toward it, covering each other despite the fading threat. Strong hands pulled Morales aboard first, then Turner, then Cole. I climbed in last. the battlefield shrinking beneath us as the aircraft rose into the dark sky. Only then did the weight of the night settle fully. The smoke, the fire, the narrow line between survival and loss. We had walked it and crossed back. Hours later, inside the forward command post, the full truth became clear. Intelligence confirmed the ambush had been carefully designed: communication suppression, containment geometry, coordinated strike. Without restored signal, no response would have been triggered. Without response, Bravo Recon would have been erased before dawn. Command did not exaggerate when they said it plainly. Without that decision on the ridge, we would not have made it out. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night never truly faded. Some experiences do not leave you. They settle quietly, becoming part of how you see the world. Yet the silence that once meant isolation and danger felt different now. It no longer carried fear. It carried peace. The ridge was far behind us, but its lessons remained close. Morales recovered slowly, the wound in his shoulder healing with time and stubborn determination. He still joked about the scar, calling it his signal mark, though we all knew how close he had come to losing more than blood that night. Cole returned to Overwatch duty, calm and steady as ever, his confidence unchanged, but deeper somehow, the quiet certainty of someone who had stood on the edge and held. Turner never lost his humor. Even after everything, he still found ways to make the team laugh, reminding us that survival is not just about strength, but about spirit. Outwardly, life in the unit returned to routine: patrols, briefings, maintenance, preparation for the next mission. But inside, something had shifted for all of us. We had seen what happens when structure disappears, when certainty vanishes, when silence replaces command. And we had learned that leadership is not a rank worn on the chest. It is a decision made in the moment when everything else falls away. War is often described as noise: gunfire, engines, explosions, orders shouted through chaos. But the truth is, the most powerful moments often arrive in silence. The second before action, the breath before a decision, the space where fear and responsibility meet. In that space, choice defines everything. I still remember the exact moment the radio died, the weight of that quiet pressing in from all sides. No guidance, no reassurance, no voice to follow, only the realization that waiting meant loss. That someone had to step forward, not because they were ordered to, but because the moment demanded it. Leadership is responsibility, not control over others, but control over yourself, over fear, doubt, hesitation. It is choosing action when inaction feels safer. It is standing steady so others can stand with you. That night on the ridge, every one of us carried that responsibility, but they looked to me to act first. And because of that trust, hesitation was never an option. We did not survive because we were stronger. We survived because we adapted, because we trusted, because when silence tried to take everything, we refused to let it. People sometimes ask what changed after that night. The answer is simple: nothing and everything. The world kept moving. Missions continued. But inside, the meaning of command, of trust, of leadership became clearer than ever before. That night, command went silent. So I spoke. And sometimes one voice, steady, unbroken, is enough to decide who lives to see another sunrise. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?